and Gil Troy, historian, author, and prominent Zionist thinker. For our viewers, please ask your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to as many of you as possible. Yaakov, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And we're ready to start. Hopefully we'll have some quiet. But before we get going with our panel, we're still waiting on Einat. She'll be joining us just a bit later. Is going to be on television over the next few minutes, so she'll join us with a bit of a delay. But I did have the opportunity earlier today to interview Muhammad Dawarsha. Muhammad, his cousin, Awad, was one of the paramedics who treated the Israelis and just the festival goers who were at that Nova Music Festival. He was killed as he was treating some of the people who were initially wounded by Hamas. And Muhammad is just a longtime activist to try to bridge the divide between Jews and Arabs in Israel at his role at Givat Chaviva, at the Abraham Initiatives. So let me play for you the interview I did earlier this morning with Muhammad. Here we go. Thank you for joining us. And before we get into the wider picture, my condolences to you and your family. Your nephew Awad was a paramedic at this Nova Music Festival last Saturday on October 7th, the Dark Shabbat, as it's now being called. What can you tell us about Awad, what happened to him that day?
Well, actually, it's my cousin Awad. Awad was a paramedic and an ambulance driver. He was stationed in the party, probably to treat someone with a bruise or someone with an overdose in the party. And he was stationed there from Thursday through Saturday. And when the attack started, they didn't know exactly what was going on. The first injuries started rushing towards the station, the medical station on site, and in the tent that they had there. And he started treating the first wounds of the first injuries. Then they started realizing that it was a much more massive attack, and there were bullets coming towards them. His 6 other team members, there were 3 ambulances, decided to evacuate the location. He refused. He said that there are still people that need treatment. And he said to them, I'll manage. I speak Arabic. I'll be able to manage myself. And minutes later, they looked back and they saw him being shot while still holding bandages.
Wow.
In his hands, and we couldn't know what was going on for about 6 days. The military wasn't able to go back and clear the bodies for at least 3 more days, and recognizing the bodies took some time, and we were able to recognize the body through DNA tests only. He fell during fulfilling his humanitarian medical duty, and he refused to abandon his duty to the last second. And I always say, I'm someone that talks a lot about a Jewish-Arab interdependency and partnership, and Awad fulfilled it to the last breath.
The lack of a distinction, right? The fact, based on the story that he told his the other paramedics, don't worry, I could speak Arabic, I'll be able to talk to them, they won't harm me, maybe was the thought, but that didn't make a difference for Hamas.
Well, the shooting was from distance, so he probably didn't have a chance to even speak in Arabic. Those that arrived to the scene, they only saw death in their eyes, and either you get kidnapped or you get killed. Injured people were not of interest to them, and treating injuries was not of interest to them. I'm sure that if you would have had a chance to talk, he probably would have been able maybe to convince 1 or 2, but not to convince the majority of the attackers.
Right.
They were on a much bigger mission than the humanitarian mission, and I doubt that he would have been able to convince them.
Yeah. Well,
It's his maybe naive perspective, and he acted with naivety, and he acted with the depth of his humanity, that he thought that he was over someone treating him, and he couldn't just leave him to bleed out. So from one end, he brought us a great deal of sorrow and a great deal of agony to the family, but also a great deal of pride, that he stayed true to himself. He stayed true to, when you engage in the medical industry, you have to make an oath. So he kept the oath to the last breath, and he lived as a wonderful human being, and he died as a wonderful human being. And I wish all of us will have this chance of making the choice to stay human beings to our last breath.
And that's becoming very difficult, especially during a time of conflict, which I want to talk about. But I think that what a lot of people don't know about this country, because we talk so often about the divide between Jews and Arabs, is especially, and you mentioned this, in the medical sector. You go into any hospital, any medical clinic, there are Arab doctors, Jewish doctors, Arab nurses, Jewish nurses, and everybody's taking care of one another. And it's really, it's what society here should look like. And I know it's something that you've worked very hard on. And that's why I think it'd be interesting to hear from you. And again, our condolences for your own personal loss. But when looking at what's happening on a national level, how does this catch? Like, if you had to put your finger on the pulse of the Israeli Arab sector right now, what is the sentiment that you're hearing, that you're feeling from your family, your friends, about this war now between Israel and Hamas?
Well, first, Yaakov, I would say that in the medical arena, I characterize this as an island of success in Jewish-Arab relations. The Arab community built a professional capacity in these fields, and the Jewish society created space up to the situation today that 24% of the doctors in Israeli hospitals are Arab, when we are only 20% of the population. But we are also 44% of the nurses and 55% of the pharmacists. So there's a great deal of interdependency that developed here. And I would say a wonderful island that shows that, yes, we can work and cooperate with each other and help and save each other. And this is an island of success that we need to learn a lot of it. And I think that in crisis times, it's proving itself. It proved itself during COVID, when this a huge size of the Arab medical industry was fighting the joint same enemy. But during the war situation, it's a bit of a problem, because one of the past Arab members of the Knesset said, our tragedy is that our state is at war with our people. And so if it was a war of soldiers against soldiers, it's easy. We say, we duck down and we say, wait until the dust clears, and meanwhile we just maintain normal daily relationship. We continue to work in construction, we continue to work in hospitals, we continue to drive buses. But when you start seeing the human impact of the war, whether it is on fellow Israelis that fell, and unfortunately I know a number of people, friends, that their friends or their nephews were killed yesterday among the visitors. It was Kobe Richter came to visit me, and while in our morning sukkah, he got the news of his nephew that was killed, and he had to rush to see his sister to comfort her. And tomorrow I'm going to visit him to pay condolences to him. And so this is very personal on fellow citizens, fellow Jewish citizens. We share the burden of the pain, the collective pain on Israeli society. On the other end, we have friends and family and our people, the Palestinian people, that we see the human cost of the war on them. Almost 1,000 Palestinian children have been killed. These are not Hamas militants. These are not Hezbollah militants. These are bystanders that got caught in the middle. And I'm not here now to say whom to blame, whether it is Hamas to start or whether it is Israel to bomb. But that the result of it, the result is human, very, very hard human cost that is, we're exposed to it. We see different news than the rest of Israelis. We watch Al Jazeera, we watch Palestinian news, and we see the agony and the destruction that is imposed on the human aspect on the Palestinians. And this puts us a bit out of the mainstream in Israeli society. And so from one end, if we dare to speak out about this today, we get criticized by the Israeli Jewish public, which wants everyone to be completely recruited behind the military. But at the same time, we feel very uncomfortable just watching and at least not expressing our sorrow for what we're seeing on the Palestinian side.
And I think that people have to understand that there is that dual identity among Israeli Arabs to an extent, like you just expressed. And before I let you go, I do want to, ask maybe a double question. On the one hand, this comes at a time, this conflict right now, this war between Israel and Hamas, at a time that in 2023, the number of Israeli Arab deaths in Israel has reached an all-time high. The violence in the sector is out of control. Israel as a government is not doing enough. More needs to be done by the police and by all institutions. I think we can all agree on that. But now comes this conflict. So there's already a lot of distrust between the Israeli Arab sector, society, and the government. And now there's a conflict that, as you said so eloquently, is also, there's a conflict inside people because of the identity. Is there a way forward, Muhammad?
Well, we did inherit a lot of infrastructural problems between Jewish and Arab citizens. And much of it is this result of the work of this government, which I think is probably the worst we've ever had for Jewish-Arab relations, with the presence of extreme voices that are trying to take Jewish-Arab relations to more of confrontational path than reconciliatory path. So I hope that this shakeup might actually change the government to something much more moderate in its relationship to Arab citizens. But, despite all of those problems, yes, this is not the first war, although this is a mega war that we haven't seen like it. I still believe that we're going to overcome this with all of the pain that both the Jewish and the Arab citizens are carrying, all of the pain across the border, also on the Palestinian side. I think everyone acted so responsibly, except maybe for Ben Gvir, who's been just throwing statements right and left, trying to, he's like a pheromone, trying to create fires. I think the rest of even the leadership in the Jewish and Arab society is still managing to have the right messages to calm the situation. We're not seeing Jews and Arabs fighting in the streets as we saw it in May
2021, right?
And which means that we've learned some lessons. Both the Arab and the Jewish societies, we've learned some lessons. We're not seeing people-to-people fighting or police to the Arab citizens fighting, although there are lots of reports of police preventing expressions over the media of Arab citizens and trying to control bloggers, and universities threatening Arab citizens not to put any social media posts. So there is an uncomfortable feeling, but at least we're not out in the streets fighting. And I think that no matter what will happen in the next probably month or so, I think we're going to overcome it and keep calm within the Israeli society between Jews and Arabs.
Well, Muhammad, again, our condolences to you and your entire family for your cousin Awad's murder, and and I think your message is important for people to hear right now of how hopefully we can all overcome this, and remember that we're all here together at the end of the day.
We're here together for now. As I said, Arab doctors are still working in Israeli hospitals and treating all patients, Jewish and Arab. Arab bus drivers are carrying their burden, their civic burden. You hear wonderful stories of care, what's called in Hebrew, arvut hadadit, during time of crisis, mutual care. And I think the more stories like this we were able to witness, I think like Awad's story, I think this is what will keep us together to overcome the current crisis. And I hope that it's going to be a short crisis and not prolonged for too much.
Inshallah. Amen.
God willing.
Thank you very much, Muhammad.
Thank you, Yaakov.
So I found that conversation to be very moving, right? To hear someone who's Israeli Arab on the one hand saying, we have this dual identity, it's complicated, we are Israeli, we are treating Israelis, we're in this together, but at the same time, we're reading, we're watching Palestinian TV and we're watching Al Jazeera and we're seeing everything that's going on. Einat, I thought to start with you, there is something interesting that's happening that we despite I've heard from intelligence officials that the Iranians have been trying to stoke the flames and stir conflict among Israeli Arabs and in the West Bank. And we've seen some escalations a little in the West Bank, but nothing really among Israeli Arabs. And that is interesting why that hasn't happened in comparison to the Guardian of the Wall, Shomer Chomot, back in 2021, where we really saw riots in all of the mixed cities. What's been your impression of why that's the case right now?
The only explanation I have right now is just the scale and the brutality of the horror. To the extent that I can draw a parallel, I think the combination of 9/11 and ISIS was such a shock to some leaders in the Arab world that it placed them on a path to rethinking Arabism and to rethinking Islam. And in many ways, the normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab countries, I called it collateral benefit from that. When Arab leaders understood that their very survival depended on their ability to offer a different vision of Islam than the one that ISIS was offering. And we forget now how exciting ISIS vision was for Muslims around the world who literally got on planes to join it. So my explanation, and I think we've seen it in the post by Nas Daily, when he said, I'm now Israeli first and Palestinian second, is the understanding that if this is being done in their name, and it was being done in their name, in the name of the Palestinian cause, it's important to emphasize Hamas did what it did in the service of a Palestinian vision. And I think especially Arabs in Israel who know Israeli society better than anyone in the Arab world, the horror, the shock of the horror is getting some of them first, just a paralysis not to join, but also the beginning of a path to say, not in my name, and this is not how we want to define what it means to be an Arab Israeli or a Palestinian.
So, Shmuel, there was just now, about an hour ago, the Knesset was meeting, right? And the winter session has returned. In parentheses, we could just say that everyone thought this was going to be the return of the judicial overhaul. Well, for now, at least that's been put on ice for the time being.
Neither this nor the law that was meant to exempt the ultra-Orthodox for military service.
Correct. That's a whole other story we'll have to deal with at some point. But
both are off the table for now.
But it'll actually be interesting. At some point, we will talk on this webinar about the whole Haredi. We spoke a bit with Rivka last week about the whole Haredi role, but that is going to be interesting to look at that going forward. But I do want to talk to you, Mansour. So Avigdor Kalani, the famous war hero, former IDF general, Knesset member, came to the Knesset plenary and gave the mishaberach, right, the bracha, the blessing for Chaylei Tzahal, for IDF soldiers. And what was interesting to see in the video that was circulating was Mansour Abbas, the leader of Ram, right, the former member of his party was a member of the coalition of the last government, the Bennett Lapid government, stood up during that blessing. I mean, just off of what Muhammad said, off of what Einat said, you've done some polling on this over the years, looking at sentiments within the Israeli Arab sector, nothing necessarily fresh since the conflict erupted. How do you understand this change that we're seeing?
Well, first of all, I must say that I'm not sure what to say, because as I prepared for my remarks, I was going to tell the story of Avigdor Kalani and Mansour Abbas standing up. It was a remarkable moment. Many of our viewers probably don't understand the mythology of Kalani, a hero of both 1967 and 1960, 1973, of two wars. He excelled in these two great battles that Israel had to fight. And for him to stand there and say a prayer for the soldiers, and for Mansour Abbas as a representative of a, fairly large Arab party, stand up with the rest of the Knesset, except for the other Arab members who did not stand up, and identify with this moment, that was really remarkable and moving in many ways. Look, the story of Arab Israelis and Israel in recent years is a complicated story. On the one hand, we had this inflammation point of 3 years ago, the worst moment of Jewish-Arab relations within Israel since the 50s, I guess. And on the other hand, for the first time in Israel's history, we had an Arab party officially joining an Israeli coalition as part of a ruling coalition. So you have this mix of trends, some of them pointing at worsening relations, some of them pointing at better relations. And I think this dichotomy is part of the struggle of Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs as they grapple to find common ground without asking both sides to give up on their identity, sense of nationality, etc. It is difficult for Jews in Israel to trust Arabs in some ways, certainly after 2021. On the other hand, it is difficult for Arab Israelis to fully identify with Israel when they see that the Palestinian issue is not yet resolved. And yet, for both sides, Jews and Arabs in Israel, I think it dawned on both sides that there's no better alternative for them but to strengthen their relations, to better integrate these two societies, to better accommodate one another in ways that will make life in Israel good for Jews and for Arabs. Because I don't see anyone in Israel, especially not the Arabs, looking to Gaza and saying, "Well, here's the model regime that I would like to see here in Israel." Certainly, in Israeli Arabs, when they look around at different regimes in the Middle East, whether it's the worst regimes such as Hamas in Gaza, or even somewhat better rulers, they know that in Israel, they still have the best available deal, at least in this region.
Yeah, Gil, I totally related with what Muhammad was saying, obviously, about medical staff, right? Today I went to my local clinic and got a flu shot. Obviously, it was given to me by an Arab nurse because, like he said, what was it, like 55% of nurses or 44% of nurses in the country are Arab, and 55% of the pharmacists are Arab as well. But it does feel, to an extent, that people understand that we're in this together for the first time, right? Not that necessarily they feel the same threat from Hamas, but maybe because what Einat was also talking about, just the how atrocious this was, really drew out some sort of maybe a new sense of belonging. Do you like that could play out differently in a future government and the day after for society?
I think there are three dimensions. One, indeed, just the scale of the horror. Two, I remember the first day we heard that there were an estimated 40 Israeli Arabs killed, and I'm sure when we actually get the breakdown, right? And that I'm terrified and yet curious about what's going to be the breakdown of the 1,600. How many young? How many old? What from which different sectors of society? We know there are many Druze who were killed and Bedouin who were killed that day. So also many Israeli Arabs. So they also kind of they were in the targets. They were in the sights, as this young man Awad was. And then the third dimension really is this fascinating identity where they're on their own journey. And indeed, as I was listening to Muhammad, who's just so inspiring, such a good person, has done so much to try to bring the communities together. It really is about leadership. And I know we're being very careful not to talk about the day after. We're being very careful not to predict about what's going to happen with the government, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And I never thought I'd be sitting here missing the judicial reform debate. But indeed, this is really going to be an opportunity. This is going to shake up society in so many ways. We've talked about Haredi, non-Haredi relations. This also can be an opportunity for us to say, hey, wait a minute. We really are one in a very profound way. And I think Israeli Arabs understood that while Israel wasn't going to threaten their lives if they acted up, the lives as they know them, their lifestyles, the things they've built up would indeed not survive if they started acting today as some of their members, and we should emphasize that really some, had acted in May 2021. Everybody's throwing around that word existential, Q me. And I think for Israeli Arabs on many, many levels, this has been Q me. And I'm just hoping that it'll be a constructive opportunity. It was also interesting how Mohammed talks about infrastructural issues and identity issues, right? And the infrastructural issues are how we allocate resources and make sure that they're truly a part of our society. But when he says, you know, our state is fighting our people, this might be an opportunity to say, no, your people are also different, that you're not Israeli Arabs, you're Palestinians. I was once on a debate with someone in Berkeley who was saying, how dare you call them Israeli Arabs? And I actually happened to have a poll showing that most Israeli Arabs call themselves Israeli Arabs. And so he was there in Berkeley kind of defining them as Palestinians for his cause. And I think there's a lot of using of these people and a lot of exploiting of these people. And the opportunity here really is to build a new path.
100%. You know, the problem is obviously the government that we have right now is not exactly the best government to facilitate that new path forward.
I hadn't noticed, but yes.
Right, which has me just a bit concerned in the day after. You know, it's not as if Ben Gvir is going to be the guy who's going to go make Israeli Arab towns safer and more secure, and then they're going to feel part and parcel of Israeli society. But it's a huge challenge. And I think it can give us some hope that, you know, the fact that things are relatively quiet in these mixed cities, we're not seeing a repeat of 2021, and we have people like Muhammad out there, does say something maybe about the resilience here. I do want to shift topics, though, and talk about what's happening with America. So, Shmuel, what we've seen now is a second aircraft carrier being sent here to the region. And maybe I'll ask this question through a story that my own 17-year-old daughter said to me the other day. And I'm sure everybody who has children who is listening and watching, and Israelis, definitely, no matter where you're living in this country, they're afraid, right? I mean, you know, anyone with a phone and any kid is watching and seeing what's going on and seeing some of these horrific videos, but also hearing us adults talk about this all the time. Probably I'm not the best father for trying to keep quiet about it because I talk about it all the time. But she said to me, you know, Abba, you know what, Dad? It's very scary, but what gives me confidence is that America's with us. And America's really with us in a way that we haven't seen before. But I do wonder something. And that is that we have, you know, Israel's whole ethos to an extent has been built around this concept or this idea that we protect ourselves by ourselves, right? We don't need, we you know, sell us weapons, give us help. We'll buy the F-35, give us JDAMs, give us, you know, money to build Iron Dome and Arrow. But when it comes to fighting, it's Israeli soldiers. And there was a report today in Yediot Ahronoth by one of their, probably the leading columnists in Israel, Nahum Barnea, who said that when Lloyd Austin, U.S. Secretary of Defense, was in Israel just this past weekend, he said to Netanyahu, if don't start a war with Hezbollah, do everything you can to contain it. But if they do attack you, we will be there to retaliate. That is a change to an extent. And just this whole presence here. I mean, how do you see, like on a deeper level for a moment, how do you see the shift, if it is a shift?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a shift. I think the Americans are here for various reasons, some of which are concern their own interests and their own need to contain this war and to keep it within the Gaza territory without it expanding and inflaming a whole global or regional and then global inflammation. Look, the United States, and this is something that many people might not appreciate, I'm sure, or at least I hope that Gil will support me on this as a historian. The United States is Israel's best friend because Israel is strong, not because it's weak. If you go back and look at the trajectory of U.S.-Israel relations, the United States, well, did approve of Israel's establishment right at the outset. But then During the 50s, there were no real relations between the two countries. In the 60s, it began warming up, but the real point of change was 1967, when Israel became a regional power. Only then the Americans realized that there is value to being Israel's ally, that there is value to Israel that they can exploit in some way. This was the Cold War.
Yeah.
This was the Cold War. They wanted allies in every region, and Israel became a player that they could rely on. So 1967 was a turning point, and it is essential. You know, of course, all of us Israelis much appreciate the friendship of the United States and the alliance with the United States, and the fact that they sent here rockets and ships and airplanes. But we should make no mistake. If Israel is projecting weakness, American support will also erode with time. So our role as Israelis is, of course, to rely on America when possible, to get their help, to cooperate with the United States, to coordinate our steps with Washington. But also we need to show them, the Americans, that we are still as valuable as we used to be. And I think that's something that, at least in the Israeli leadership, this point must be something that they keep in mind.
So, Einat, one of the previous Netanyahu governments, back when Trump was president, started to float this idea of a defense treaty, right, a defense pact, something that was always a bit controversial. And obviously there were the elections that kind of went to the side. The Bennett-Lapid government did not advance that. But since the Netanyahu government came back in January, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer has been pushing this more limited. And it seemed like it was going to be something that was going to be maybe part of a larger Saudi deal. But I'm wondering now, after everything that we've seen over the last week, and who knows what's going forward, do you think that would come back, and how would Israelis take to it?
In many ways, what we're seeing right now is the fact that it's actually happening in action, without any declarations, without any signatures, but this is what's going on. And it is happening because the United States has broader strategic interests in the region. The reason that the idea was always and remains controversial was the sense that this would also place limits on Israel's ability to act. And this has been actually an ongoing story. The difference between one of the difference between the swift victory in the Six-Day War and the more harrowing one in the Yom Kippur War is a commitment that Israel made to the United States not to strike first, as it did in the Six-Day War, which made a huge difference. So there was always an understanding that the closer we are enmeshed with the American security system infrastructure, we are also limiting our ability to maneuver, to take action without American approval. And what is happening is that we are actually seeing it play out in real time. And it remains to be seen how it will play out. But we're already seeing America doing both elements of it. On the one hand, saying we're completely behind you, but also making it clear what the limitations are. And we're going to see this dual dynamic going forward. And that was always the controversial element about this idea.
So, Gil, when we do think about the Americans for a moment, back in the US, first of all, the media there is still, this is all they talk about, right? The Israel-Hamas war and special live feed and so many reporters who are still on the ground. It's taken over everything, right? Ukraine, Russia, who remembers that there was a war there? It used to be everything, the only thing people spoke about. Now it's very much this. How long does that sustain itself? This US interest, but also, if I could just sharpen it, not just the overall US interest, but Biden is going out on a limb here, right? With what he's doing, especially within his own party. there's maybe a political consideration here as well. I don't know, right? Someone said to me yesterday, of course he wants to come to Israel. He'll jump 5 points in the polls, right? Going to a war zone as president. What's your feeling in the US right now in terms of their appetite for a larger involvement and maybe even military engagement here?
I don't want to sound too cynical, but the American public has a severe case of ADD, and if Taylor Swift has a major breakup or something, we could be yesterday's news.
Wait, hold on. Sorry to interrupt, but you saw
No,
about Taylor. There was news about Taylor Swift.
Oh, there was? I saw that she made
yesterday.
Like
there was
$95
news about
million.
Taylor Swift.
Ah.
She has an Israeli bodyguard,
Uh-huh.
and he came to Israel to serve in the reserves.
Wow.
So don't worry, Taylor Swift is already in the headlines, somehow connected to the Israel-Hamas war.
I also saw that she made $95 million in like her first 2 concerts. But more seriously, everyone from the moment this awful thing happened has known that there's kind of like this ticking time bomb called the Western conscience and American attention. And we've actually been surprised at how long it's been sustained. And I think it's been sustained for a number of reasons that are worth mentioning. One, I think the leadership of Joe Biden. Joe Biden, you saw from his speech on last Tuesday, and it's continued, was truly, truly horrified and appalled. And he has helped set the tone. And it really has been an extraordinary moment of presidential leadership, regardless of politics. But I will get to the politics. I think also many Americans, they recognize that it was bad for Russia to invade Ukraine. But Israel has always been much closer to the American soul. Israel has always been, in addition to Shmuel's excellent comment about the fact that, yes, there's this interest about Israel being this powerful regional force, it also has always had the sentimental part. You know, the American Zionist and pro-Israel community goes into stress every time there's a negative headline. And up and down over the years, the Gallup polls have consistently shown that over 75% of Americans support Israel and over 83% of American Jews support Israel. And so to see these images and to see the violence was truly, truly upsetting in the most profound way. Now, there is also a political dimension, which is that we are approaching 2024. Donald Trump continues to dominate the Republican Party, throw his thunderbolts of oversimplification and sophomoric analysis left, right, and center. And Joe Biden is facing a problem of the Afghanistan disaster, the Ukraine stalemate, and now on his watch, Israel also explodes. So for political reasons and principled reasons and sentimental reasons, Joe Biden needs this problem to be solved. So we're seeing that, yes, Israel needs to have a big victory, but also America needs to have a big victory. Yeah. And I think Anthony Blinken came and spoke so perfectly at the press conference with Bibi Netanyahu yesterday. He said, the message that I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, emphasizing autonomy, self-determination, that Zionist ideal of we can do it ourselves. But as long as America exists, you will never, ever have to. We will always be there by your side. That is pitch perfect. And that captures the 2 dimensions that we've been exploring here of Israel has to do this on its own. Israel has to have this big win on its own. And I go back to what I said yesterday, which is our leaders have to be very careful not to over-escalate and over-promise some kind of victories we can achieve. But we also have to understand that this is profoundly in America's interest. And one last thought, if I may. Apparently, Joe Biden is coming to visit. When he comes through customs, there's one thing he has to declare: his willingness to utter that 4-letter word that was missing from his speech on Tuesday, I-R-A-N, Iran. Joe Biden has to put on the table what has been sort of underneath many of these moves of the 2 aircraft carriers and Blinken coming and the defense secretary coming and on and on and on, which is that Iran has to know, and you put it so beautifully in your Newsweek column this week, Yaakov, that Iran has to know that America is going to have zero tolerance for any antics, not only from Iran, but from Hezbollah as well. And that's the most important role that America can play. Be honest and be explicit about Iran. And one of these days, we should talk about the blind spot that too many Americans, and I'm sorry to say, too many Democratic politicians and Democratic leaders have had about the Iranian danger, not just to little Satan, Israel, but to big Satan, America.
We have a couple minutes left. I want to go real quickly through the panel. A lot of people are talking about how much time Israel has, right? That's like the big question. The ground offensive is going to begin apparently at some point. Gil, yeah, let's just start with you. How long would you estimate? People, so there are some people who think, oh, it's unlimited. Biden's with us. It's unlimited. What's your take on how long this will last?
I can't predict the future. All I can say is that every day there are more of these ugly pictures coming out. I just got a text from a friend of mine in New York who showed on the Upper West Side of New York, there are pictures kidnapped, missing. The more we keep the story of the kidnapped victims out there and not so much inside Israel, the more we show what is going on and how unjust this is. And the more we emphasize that this is not just a threat to Israel, but a threat to Western civilization, the longer America will be with us, Western attention will be with us, and we'll be able to do what we need to do, not only for ourselves, but for the entire civilized world.
Einat?
I feel that everything is different this way. So the regular conversations about the window is closing, how much time until a ceasefire. This is a century-long war of attrition that we've been involved in. History is now turning on its hinge. I don't think we can have any of the regular conversations. So my answer would be as long as it takes.
And Shmuel?
I basically agree with Einat, and I would add that on a tactical level, what we see now is almost the opposite of the Lebanon War of 2006. Back then, Israel rushed into war without much preparation. It was a surprise attack by Israel without the period in which you build the force and prepare it for battle. This time, Israel in some way behaves almost like the United States in the Gulf War. You bring the people in, you build your forces, you have time to prepare them for battle, you have time for some preparations, and only then you go in. So I think the fact that we are impatient, see something already happening because that's the way it used to be in previous rounds.
Right.
That we are in a new situation, in a new story. I think the IDF is acting differently and deliberately so. So let's brace ourselves for a long haul.
I want to thank everyone, definitely our panelists, Gil Troy, Shmuel Rosner, Einat Wilf, everyone for joining us, and Muhammad Dawarsha, who wasn't able to be with the live feed, but I was able to record earlier today. And to thank all our viewers and listeners, you can continue to watch this on our YouTube channel, as well as on Times of Israel. And we will be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Israel time, 11 Eastern. And until then, let's hope for a quiet evening.